Thank you, Danny. Welcome everybody to the series Speaking Up for Point Malate, in which invited speakers address key questions and issues about Point Malate, and members of the public can ask questions. We acknowledge that the East Bay is unceded territory of the Lijan Ohlone people, who were the traditional stewards of this land. The Ohlone live here today, and they merit our respect and recognition of their presence, their culture, and their ancestors. The speaker will present for around 40 minutes, and then we'll answer questions. Please limit questions to 1 minute. We invite sincere questions asked with courtesy and respect. You are also welcome to put questions into the chat as they occur to you. If you would like to raise more complex issues, please put them into the chat as well so that we can consider them for future sessions. And although issues around Point Malate can be contentious, let's be polite and courteous. Also, please use the chat to let us know how we can improve. Once we get started, I will put the link for the Speaking Up YouTube channel into the chat in case you would like to see recordings of other sessions. My name is Sally Tobin. Pam Stello and I are co-founders of this speaker series. I'm a biologist and retiree of the Stanford Center for Biomedical Ethics. I work with the Point Malate Alliance and the Richmond Shoreline Alliance, and I'm a member of the Bay Area Sea Kayakers. I serve on the board of Citizens for East Shore Parks and live in Richmond. Pam Stello is co-chair of the Point Malate Alliance and also the Richmond Shoreline Alliance, and serves on the board of Citizens for East Shore Parks. Pam lives in Richmond. Please wave, Pam. We are lucky to have Danny Zaki as our Zoom administrator. She is Bay and Shoreline organizer for the San Francisco Bay chapter of the Sierra Club. Please wave, Danny. Thank you. Okay, so our speaker today is Michael Stocker. Michael is the founding director of Ocean Conservation Research, a scientific research and policy development organization focused on understanding the impacts of and finding solutions to the growing problem of human-generated ocean noise pollution. He is a technical generalist conversant in physics, acoustics, biology, electronics, and cultural history, and we will benefit tonight from his gift for conveying scientific and technical issues in clear, understandable terms. Michael has loved nature and the seashore from an early age. His mom could take him to the beach and drop him into a tide pool, after which she could stretch out on the sand, crack a novel, and not be pestered for the rest of the day. But like many of us, Michael's career was influenced by a teacher, an exceptionally tedious biology teacher, which led to his studies of music, physics, acoustics, and electronics, anything but biology. He is now an internationally recognized expert on underwater acoustics and has been developing methods of exploring the dimensions of the marine acoustic environment and reducing the impacts of noise on marine habitats. That is, when he is not working in premier Hollywood sound and film studios or designing for the U.S. National Holocaust Museum, Skywalker Ranch, or the Monterey Bay Aquarium, among others. Michael will be speaking to us today about issues related to protecting the natural soundscape upon which all marine life depends. His book, published in 2013, is Here Where We Are, and that's HEAR, where we are, Sound, Ecology, and Sense of Place. Michael, take it away.
Thank you, Sally. I'm honored to be here. It's really really a gift to see so many engaged community members who want to see this park blossom. And I've watched my friend David Helvar get involved in this, and he's a great spokesperson generally for the ocean, and he's really taken this task on with the park in a really great way. So I really look forward to wandering around in the park myself soon enough. Or maybe not quite soon enough, but certainly soon. I am going to share my screen here because you don't want to look at me for 40 minutes. The discussion that I'm going to do is not really specifically focused on Point Malate, but anywhere the ocean meets the shore, there is that whole boundary where it dives in from a visual environment on the shore to an auditory acoustical environment in the ocean. And we were kind of delayed by maybe 20 years in terms of our understanding of ocean acoustics by Michel Cousteau, who basically said that the ocean was a silent realm. It's far from that. The Monde de Silence was his big movie that got everybody excited about going into the water. I think a lot of the people that I grew up with and people that I work with now, it's certainly in my age bracket, are people who were influenced by Cousteau's sea ocean movies and things like that. And then we had a couple of other distracting, like the series Flipper and what have you. So, or Sea Hunt with it was taking the sea for granted in a way that was not really consistent with what's going on. So what I'm going to do is run you through a quick, it's kind of a guessing game called What Was That Sound? Let me see if I can get the chat window here. We usually have this, okay, I'm going to put that, no, it's not going to be, well, I'm going to have to fake it here because essentially the chat window now when I show, oh no, I can do it over here. Good. That's great. So essentially, as I said, let me see if this is not, it's not advancing. We can, oh, there we go. Good. Okay, you got it. So let me take this out of here. So pretty much all critters in the sea use sound one way or the other, either by making it or hearing it or both. And so we have invertebrates, fish, marine mammals, but there's also earthquakes, the weather. There's over 8,000 lightning strikes in the ocean every day. And those strikes make noise. And then, of course, human industry. We're going to go over a few of these things. And this is the kind of what was that sound guessing game. And we'll start off with this one here, which is ubiquitous.
Oats.
Yeah, if you'd like to play along, you can chime in or write it in the chat. That's a sound that we hear pretty much everywhere in temperate waters, the snapping shrimp. And there's a few different species of various sizes from maybe 2 inches long to maybe 4 inches long. And they have this large claw, they snap and it creates a cavitation bubble that is so loud that it stuns its prey. And it can stun a fairly large animal. I mean, this is so that's their way of hunting. But because they're so ubiquitous, whenever you stick your head in the water and you hear that kind of fizzy sound and then under it, almost anywhere, even in the bay here, that's that's what these guys are. But there's a suggestion that this is serves as acoustical daylight for fish that don't make sounds themselves, but go around at night, that this is like the sun that hits the surface and then a coherent reflection of that comes back and we can see it. That sound does the same thing and it can hit coral or the sea bottom or what have you. And the animals can actually use that to resolve their surroundings auditorially. Oops, that was one I gave that one away here, but this is another. So what this is a mantis shrimp, and these are interesting animals. We have some species here, smaller ones in the bay, but this one here is about half a meter in length. It's very large. And these guys build these little warrens, these little dens. A male and a female build a den, and they'll live up to 20, maybe 22 years, and they'll be, marital fidelity is kind of what this is about. You have the same den together, and you need that to actually breed and procreate. But that particular sound was them purring to each other. That was kind of a breeding sound. And these guys also have pretty amazing eyes. They're in shallow water. We have 3 cones, which allow us to kind of decipher 3 different colors, the red and the blue and the yellow, and they mix together and create the rainbow we see. These guys have 9 cones, so they see spectral visuals that we can only imagine what they see. Okay, another sound here. Oh, this is giving me grief. That there is a rock lobster, and it's scratching. Its antennas have these little pads behind them, so when they lay their antennas back, they can kind of rub against it and create this kind of file-like sound. Obviously, it has some purpose, which we don't know. It's delivering the news. And for this last page here, that is the sound of a healthy reef. You hear fish, and you hear invertebrates, and you hear kind of chirping and chortling and humming going through that. If you took a hydrophone and put it out in the eelgrass that's just off of Point Melody there, it would sound maybe akin to that. You wouldn't hear, well, it would be interesting to, in fact, I should probably do that just to get a feel for it, because the eelgrass has a lot of different critters in it. And so that would be an interesting thing to hear. And actually might be interesting if it's enough noise out there to have that signal coming up on shore. We can hear it all the time. Although I have to say, I have recordings from the bay, and it sounds like a machine shop down there, because you have all the shipping industry, you have pile driving that's happening down in Oakland, where they're developing the bay, and a lot of the pleasure boats and what have you. So you can hear in certain places fish and certainly the snapping shrimp, but there's also a lot of mechanical noise that we hear. Okay, what do we have here? You would hear these. Okay. You would hear these off Point Melody. It's an intertidal animal called a midshipman. They're about 6 inches long. They make huge noise. And the first time that these guys showed up in the news in our area was back in the early 80s. I see a question here. The early 80s, in this, I'll answer that question. These animals were up in Richardson Bay when they had all those anchorets out there on their boats. And this noise was keeping everybody awake. And they were worried that it was some military program, or there was aliens, or they had no idea what it was, but it took a little exploration to find out it was these dinky little fish. And they have this muscle that they oscillate their swim bladder, and that creates that hum. This is actually two males that are courting a female, and you hear their sound is kind of phasing a little bit. Let's see who else we have here. Those are, so I mean, to answer the question that Dorothy asks is how easy is it to hear these sounds with the human ear? Our ears are not adapted to hear sounds underwater that well, but these are pretty noisy. You can hear it, but generally, in order to really kind of mark it, we use hydrophones, drop them in the water and have a speaker above or a recording system above. That was croakers. There's a lot of fish that are gamete dispersal fish. They basically don't form fidelitous pairs or a small breeding group, but rather all the males and all the females basically get together in these large breeding aggregations, and then they will the sound is kind of part of how they excite themselves, if you will. They will do this, and then the females will kick out their eggs and milk, and then the males will kick out their spermatozoans, their milk, and it kind of mixes in the water, and these large aggregations of fish are the result of that. But there's a lot more stages between their breeding aggregation, the gamete dispersal, and they're going and doing it again. But it's those sounds are the sounds of their breeding aggregation. And this here is I like that because it sounds like somebody laughing, a sinister laugh. But this is a Bardiella, and they make their sounds. They have these pharyngeal teeth, which are on their tongue, and then they have another kind of a file pattern on the roof of their mouth. So they kind of move those and create that raspy sound. It's another breeding aggregation of silver perch. This was recorded by David Mann. Okay, the next page. What else do we have here? Okay. Oh, there's some wild ones here. It sounds like it's from outer space, but this is a whale seal. The animals that live on the poles have these long periods of darkness, and they have more elaborate sounds than the other seals that live in our area. We have harbor seals here, and fur seals. They don't have as elaborate sounds. The fur seals and harbor seals kind of grunt and growl a little bit. But the whale seal and the ring seal in the Arctic, whale seals are of course down the Weddell Sea, which are in the Antarctic. These other, maybe this is one too. Are we lucky? That's an animal we have here, but that's not a seal. That is a minke whale, and we have them here. They're interesting. They're pretty active. But I have some minke sounds further on, but this is kind of they call the Star Wars sound, and they've only got a couple of recordings of it, and they don't know what the purpose of the sound is, but it's interesting. I'm going to play it again because it's short. You hear the crackling in the background. That's a snapping shrimp. The snapping shrimp is really the bane of bioacousticians, because we have to actually try to record through that and have something clear. It's very difficult sometimes. And this is what the old mariners called the carpenter fish. It sounds like journeyman carpenters on Monday morning. Turns out it's the sperm whales. And these animals are probably one of the more acoustically complex animals in the ocean. They make these clicking and clacking sounds, and they do sonar like the other toothed whales do. But this organ that they have in their head is full of this spermaceti oil, and that actually, because the way they can manipulate it through thickness, through heat, they can when it heats up, oddly enough, it's got a positive thermal coefficient. So when it heats up, it gets thicker. Unlike most oils, when it heats up, it gets thinner. And when it cools down, it gets thinner. And they use that as a buoyancy manipulation, but they also have these interesting kind of density lenses in it that allow them to really focus their signals, their sounds. So they have these codas, which are identifiable to individuals within it, but it's really very complicated for us to actually try to decipher, because there's not really a pitch component to it. It's all pretty much clicking and banging. And who do we have here? That is by far the most complex acoustical animal in the ocean. They have these, this is a beluga whale. They are Arctic animals. There's a small clade of them that are in the Cook Inlet, but most of them have always in contact with ice by the pole. And they have the social signals, which are the squeals that you can hear, and all this clicking are their biosonar. And that was a group of about 20 in a cooperative hunting engagement. And they, this little melon that they have here, also they can modulate that to change the way sound is broadcast out of that area, because they have these phonic lips behind that. It reflects out, and they can change that in mind-blowing dimensions very fast. They can blow it up like a big balloon. They can collapse it. And it all that really modulates, among other things, modulates the way that sound is emitted out of that. So, okay, now the dulcet strains of human industry. That doesn't stop usually. That is a tanker. You can hear the engine pushing the propeller around. That is taken from about 3 miles distant. And here's another one here. That was the Navy sonar that was causing so much grief about 20 years ago. And it's like ice picks. It's a lot louder than that in the water. And it was actually deafening beaked whales and dolphins. And the Navy kind of throttled back on it for after a while. They were having a hard time with the public opinion on that. And I think they decided that instead of denying it, that they would actually start working with us on it. And it became, instead of doing the wrong thing, they started funding research to find out what was really the problem. And this one. This is just underwater industry. In the oil and gas industry, they have these floating platforms here that have, they can't just pull all the oil up out of the subsea ground. They have to basically pull what they can use out of it, separate it, because there's gas and sand and brine and stuff they don't use, and then they re-inject that back into the ocean and into the substrate, into the deposits. And so they have these giant industrial parks down there, if you will, that have all this equipment that make this noise all around the clock forever. And this next one. This is seismic surveys. It's happening pretty much everywhere in the world except off the Atlantic seaboard and the Pacific seaboard of the United States and the Pacific seaboard of South America. That was speeded up. That was a 10 times speed, but they basically have these, and I have the next slide, I think we'll go into this a little deeper. They have these air guns which make these explosions, and the explosion kicks the signal down into the substrate, and then they have these streamers that pick up the reflection, and then they can determine, kind of like a sonogram, using big bangs as opposed to high frequency sounds. And this is what an air gun looks like. And I think I can get it sync sound here. Oops, not that. No, it's not giving me the sound today. This is a pretty small one. And it kicked, it's a big kick, it's a big bang. And one of the things that I've been trying to surmise on this thing is that it kicks an explosion out, which is loud, but then there's that implosion part where it sucks in. It sucks in a lot faster. And I think that that's doing a lot of damage. We were up in Cook Inlet in 2019 trying to determine what effects that had on the zooplankton up there. Animals can handle pressure, but they can't handle negative pressure. So much in the way that animals are afraid of vacuum cleaners because it's something that they're not adapted to. I mean, you don't, it's a negative pressure that it freaks them out. That same thing may be happening in the ocean where what that implosion actually pulls their bodies apart. And that was my concern. And this is where it's happening. I say it's not happening here. But it's happening and not happening on this coast here, but pretty much everywhere else. I guess some places down here. And this is an old, maybe 10-year-old shot. It continues, and the size of the stars or the size of the operations here was given me by John Hildebrand. Okay, some adaptations, biosonar. So this is the beak whale we talked about. That these animals dive down, to 3,000 or 4,000 feet, and they're under like 150 atmospheres of pressure. So when these animals heard that Navy sonar sound, they freaked out and they basically headed to the surface as fast as possible because they're air breathing. But what ended up happening is the air that they breathe, which is like 32 liters of air capacity at the surface, gets compressed down to like 1 liter. When they come up too fast, it's like they get the bends, and the inside of the animals look like milkshakes after they suffer that particular problem. And this. That's their hunting. And so they have these clicks, these biosonar clicks. They actually, if you look at them, they're like 40 kilohertz bursts. And what this particular sound is it's like a flashlight. There's the little clicking is like a flashlight. When it sights something, as it gets closer and closer, the clicks get faster and faster, and all of a sudden they intersect it and they catch their prey. So that's what you're hearing in this particular sample. And it was most likely a squid. Let's see what's the next one here. Okay, this is a blue whale, and I don't see, I gotta move this around somewhere so I can find out where the, okay, somewhere, maybe it's over here, no. These animals pulse, and the pulsing is something that gives them an opportunity to echolocate off of geographical features. So when these animals migrate, they don't see where they are. Like this is pretty, if you're in a very clear ocean situation, you might be able to see 100 feet, and these animals are going 1,000 miles. So one of the things that they can do is that they end up bouncing the sound off of geographical features. So when they're migrating, for example, the humpback whales that are migrating from the Gulf of Alaska down to Hawaii don't just beeline it there. They end up heading towards a mountain and then down towards a trench, and they have these geological features that it's pretty clear they're using something other than vision to navigate. So let me see. Maybe it's, the sound that I'm supposed to have is pretty great, but I don't have it. So here's an example of that. These are the sound of one animal. The blue one's the sound of another animal across the ocean. So this is like 5,000 miles away. So their signals can go really far. So nature is extravagant but not wasteful. There's a reason for that. And what do we have here? More belugas, social sounds. Do I have sound on this? No. Oh, there we go. We know these are the song of the humpback whale, and these animals sing these very complex songs that last 40 minutes to an hour in length. And all of the breeding males will use these signals and use the same song, the same sequence throughout a breeding season. And then they change from year to year, but they also, the songs will migrate from one group to another. And so they have their kind of greatest hits. And it's interesting because typically when you think of males phonating in some particular way, you would say that it's a breeding fitness announcement. But what the mystery is here is these animals are using the same song. So it may be that they're calling the females in because they have kind of group breeding behaviors as well, where 2 or 3 males will collectively breed with 1 female. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of aggression, hostility involved in it. So maybe they're just singing these beautiful songs to have the gals come by. Okay, this one is breeding associated as an individual. So we don't really know how the females hear this. It seems that the males are making this. This happens up in the Arctic. This is a bearded seal, and this is happening up in the Arctic. April, May. It's the same time that the bowheads also are making those sounds, and they're breeding sounds. Bowheads also, we were realizing, have these complex, long song cycles themselves, although we don't know yet if the males all have the same song or if they just are we're just discovering this recently, that they actually have songs that they sing. They cycle through these songs. More minkie chorusing. What do I have this? Let me see. This is a little bit odd here because the my buttons are somehow missing, but we'll go into this here. Oh, okay, this is I'm gonna move this out of the way. I'm not sure if you guys are seeing the same screen I am, but this one here, this is a pulsing of minke whales, and we see this in the rorquals, which is the minke whales, the blue whales, the fin whales, the sea whales, and the Bryde's whales. They pulse, and I am thinking they're pulsing like crickets. And what this will show you, there's a one of them sole animal that's pulsing here, and then when it gets into this section here, a second one comes in and it immediately synchronizes with it. And I wish I had this. Oh, there it is, right here. Just to speed it up a little bit. So these are 2 animals that are synchronizing with each other. Unfortunately, I only had 1 hydrophone. So what I had to do is I had to look at the time difference of arrival between one and the other and the hydrophone, and then do a calculation in terms of the attenuation of the water. The second pulse is quieter because it's a little farther away from the microphone than the hydrophone than the first one is. So I've been working on this chorusing issue with the rorquals for a little while here. Okay. So those are not a mama and baby talking to each other, but I bring this up because the mamas and the babies need to whisper to each other so that the predators, in most cases the orcas, don't hear them. So they have these kind of whispering sounds they make, but that bonging sound is the walrus. Then of course more dulcet sounds of Schumann Enterprise. And that's what we're basically subjecting the entire ocean to. There are 95,000 ships that are registered with Lloyd's of London, and they're on the sea. At least half of them are on the sea at any given time. And so the ocean is becoming really noisy. And unfortunately, unlike where we are, where trees and walls and fences will somehow block the noise, the ocean doesn't get blocked like that. So you can hear these noises a long way away. The ocean is 10 times louder now than it was just 10 years ago, or just 50 years ago, I'm sorry. So it's 10 times louder. And the globalization of commerce is the thing that really has introduced that noise. I talked about oil and gas exploration. I don't want to take up way too much time on this here. These are, again, this is like propellers that they would have on these particular floating platforms, and they're all grinding away and making a lot of noise. So this is that picture that expanded here, where they have these deep sea equipment, separators and reinjection pumps and what have you, so as to be able to separate the oil and be able to bring it up to the top here. And to give you an idea what size they are, see these three little guys over here. This is the largest piece of equipment, single piece of equipment built by Statoil, and it's in the North Sea. And it makes a lot of noise. And then they have to service these things. So they have this high frequency communication sonars they're using to basically announce their physical states and communicate with them and get them to do the things they want to do. So I'm working right now with an Acoustic Society and ISO group trying to talk about they want to essentially have an underwater Internet of Things. So all pieces of equipment underwater would make their own noise. And I am moving into, I've got another 4 minutes here. I don't want to take up a lot of the question time. So pile driving sounds, this is wherever they're actually putting in structures. This is what you hear if you put a hydrophone out by Angel Island. You'll hear this going on in Oakland and Oakland Harbor, Almeda. That and the latest addition to our offshore soundscape will be these wind farms, and we're putting them up all over the place. So the problem is when we are industrializing the ocean, we bring these sounds and noises with it, and the animals that live in the ocean are not necessarily taking to it kindly, but they can't really complain about it. So we're doing public education outreach. I'm doing policy review work. We are talking about international noise standards and how do you express this? How do you create regulations? And so there's a lot of different angles on this that we're doing, and we're having some success. In terms of how this equates to Point Malate, having a park out there will provide some silence. You know, if you had a bunch of houses out there and everybody had their boats coming in and out, that would actually really disrupt, particularly the benthic habitat with the eelgrass beds out there. As I mentioned earlier, if you put a hydrophone out there, you'd hear a lot of clicking and chortling, and that would be compromised. And now we're also realizing the eelgrass itself responds to sound, that the noise is something that interferes with their ability to be able to create some kind of rooting system. You know, it's again something that's pretty new, but the plants themselves can actually respond to noise energy, acoustical energy. And with that, I am going to thank you for your time and stop sharing the screen. And yeah, that somebody says, Danny says that would drive me mad. It is. We're seeing there was an amazing study that was done by Susan Parks, who was studying the North Atlantic right whale up in the Bay of Fundy area. And Rosalind Rowland, who was also working at our lab and studying the stress levels of the right whale by measuring cortisol levels in their feces. And, we've made all this noise, we won't really know what effect, long-term or short-term effect it has, but we had a situation in 2001 where the 9/11 thing happened and they shut down shipping in the ocean for about a little over a week, and the ocean got really quiet and the stress levels went immediately down.
Hmm.
And so that is telling that essentially these animals are under stress. And the North Atlantic right whale particularly, they're endangered, and their replaceable rate is below 0.7 animals per year. We've already lost 3 this year, and there's only about 360 of them left. So add that to all the acoustical stress these animals are suffering, and I'm not sure if they're going to make it through the wind farm exercise that we're getting into. So yeah, so
Thank you very much, Michael. That was absolutely wonderful. Pam is going to handle the question and answer period today. So I'll turn it over to Pam.
well, I see also a question from David Helbard here about reducing noise impacts from offshore wind. The more I get into them, okay, we need to get away from fossil fuel. That's really clear, but we're about 30 years late on that. The wind farms are creating some noises that I'm really concerned with. When the blades intersect the stagnant air in front of the mast that has to hold up the turbine, it makes a thump. It's a really deep, very powerful thump. And we have animals that need to read barometric pressure to navigate. Birds, for example, need this navigation cue, and we're going to create this noise. It's all in that barometric area where these guys are needing that information, and we're putting thousands of these turbines out there, and right along the Atlantic flyway, as they call it. And additionally, the whales that are pulsing use that pulse for something. We're not sure exactly what, but if they have thousands of other pulsing things that are making noise and interfering with their ability to be able to discriminate what's useful information and not, it could be troubling. A colleague of mine, Manolo Castellotti, was looking at the migration of fin whales in the Mediterranean between the Ligurian Sea and Malta. And he had a 3-year study. The first 2 years, they were migrated. In the 3rd year, they went halfway down and they turned back, and he didn't know what was going on. So he kind of scanned the horizon and found that there was a seismic survey going on off the Balearic Islands in Spain, and that those pulses, these were fin whales, and the fin whales pulse at about 7 to 9 second pulse rate. And this is the same general pulse rate that a lot of seismic surveys are doing. So these animals might have been spooked, because if you talk about how animals synchronize with each other, like the minke whale demonstration I had earlier, if you have these pulses that are not making an effort to synchronize, they may be freaked out by the fact that the sound that they may think that there are other conspecifics that they can't sync with. I mean, I don't know what they thought, but they were spooked, and that was unfortunate. So,
Thank you. I think we had a couple questions in the chat as well from Kelly Hammergren and Michael Helms, and they're related questions. Michael, would you like to ask your question? So Michael has asked the question, are there technological solutions to all this human-made noise?
well, there are some. The wind farm thing, I mean, the most efficient way so far of extracting wind energy and turning it into electrical energy is the way we're doing it, and it's making this noise. We definitely need energy. I'm not going to say we should stop doing that on the one side, but we should use less energy. And that's one of the conversations that was not being had right now, is actually using less energy, making less noise generally. There are ways of quieting certain things. The underwater Internet of Things. I'm in an international standards organization that's looking at that. And one of the, I mean, they're going to need the signals. One of the things to do is, instead of making these nasty digital signals, is to do biomimicry using signals that sound more like beluga whales or dolphins than sound like the old telephone modems we used to have. So those are the types of things. But industrialization brings its noise. And now the other part is to determine if these animals can themselves filter out useful sounds out of the noise. I mean, we seem to have been flooding these animals' environment. And as I saw somebody say up here, Gene said, they're terrible noises and it would drive me crazy. Yes, it would drive me crazy too. But these animals don't really have a choice. So are they adapting to it with certain time filters or what have you? I mean, it's complex, but that's really been the bulk of my work for the past 20 some odd years now, is try to figure out how to make it quieter or make the sounds less obnoxious.
Thank you. Kelly Hammergren also asked, what's the reception to regulating noise pollution?
What's the
Reception.
Well, we have noise regulations under the National Marine Fisheries Service. We have a noise regulatory guidelines. They're very rudimentary, and they're not. They reflect arguments between biologists and industrialists. So I don't think they're only so effective. We attempt to, but what happened with the Navy, for example, they were making all this noise and they were denying that it was happening. And finally, I think they realized they needed to find out what was going on, and they've changed some of their habits as a consequence of that. They avoid areas where there's because animals are moving around in the ocean. They avoid areas where there's interference between the needed noises that these animals use, for example, during breeding season, or where they're aggregating. So those types of things are being better neighbors. But yeah, there's regulations, but as I say, they're not, in my opinion, they're not very satisfactory.
Kelly has an additional question. Kelly, would you like to unmute and ask your question? Kelly? So Kelly's asked, will the UN treaty to protect 30% of the ocean have any impact on noise?
It should do. It should do, because a lot of what they're protecting the ocean against is industrialization, industrial fishing, for example. And that brings a lot of noise into the field. And you have these trawlers that are, I mean, they're big engines with large propellers, and they're making a lot of noise. So that should do. And hopefully we can actually create sanctuaries where noise is one of the things that we actually deliberately try to curb. I mean, one of the things that's been happening particularly down in Oceania and the Philippines and Indonesia, is they have these dynamite fishers down there. And people are finally starting to realize that they're not doing themselves any favors. That there's a limited horizon on fishing effectiveness. At some point in time, there's not going to be any fish to fish.
And additionally, what are the impacts of ferries on marine life?
Of ferries, meaning ferry boats?
Yes.
They're noisy. It's a noisy thing. There's an interesting, the wind farms situation in the North Sea. They put a lot of, they're about 10 or 15 years ahead of us up there in terms of actually putting wind farms, wind generation up there. But one of the things they're realizing, the North Sea is all pretty much muddy bottom, because it's all effluent from, the Thames and the Rhine and the Ruhr and all these rivers that have kind of come into there and brought mud down to it. And there are a whole benthic habitat down there that have all these invertebrates, mostly that live in it. And one of them is this langoustine. It's a lobster that basically goes out and forages in the mud. And in the process of doing that, it kind of, it fluffs up the mud. It's a bioirrigation thing. And the fluffing the mud allows it to be habitat for the critters that these animals eat. The annelid worms and copepods and the problem is the noise is interfering, that they're under stress, and it's interfering with their ability to be able to do that. So their decrease in bioirrigation efficiency by 30%. If the North Sea does not get fluffed up, it turns into concrete, and then all those other animals can't inhabit it, and so it's a problem. And where's that noise coming from? It's gearbox noise that's coming down the masts of the turbines and into the substrate, and maybe they can decouple that. They've already put hundreds and hundreds of those things up there, so it's a lot of work. Ellen, you've got your hand up. You gotta unmute. There you go.
It wouldn't allow me to unmute. It said the program won't allow the observers to unmute. Thank you, whoever changed it. Yes, two questions. One is that I've snorkeled a lot in Hawaii and other places and heard whales singing and also porpoises, but I've never heard the other sounds, although I snorkeled over coral reefs very much. Second question relates historically. When the first LPs came out with whale songs on them, humpbacks, I used them in schools with children, referring to books such as, like 2 Years Before the Master, Moby Dick, and other sea stories of sailors who, hearing these eerie sounds in the sea amplified by the wooden boats. I just wondered, is there records of how much sailing or sea people heard of these sounds when they were in the air or in a boat? Thank you.
Well, the boat hull is important because it couples with the water itself, and so it acts as a way of amplifying that. Our ears are not really well adapted to hearing underwater because that's the pressures. We're a pressure sensor, and sound in the ocean, while there are animals that do sense pressure, they also sense particle motion. And one of the ways you can determine the efficiency of this is if you reach out on the table in front of you and scratch your finger lightly, you might be able to barely hear it, but if you stick your ear on the table itself, you'll be able to hear it loud and clear. That's called particle motion, and it moves very efficiently in material substances that are not compressible like water. So the noises that these old sailors were hearing, turned into the sirens and the various denizens of the deep that they're scared of, because they heard so much of it through the hulls of their boats. There's a lot less life now in the ocean than there was back in the old sailing days. They've pulled millions and millions of whales out, and some of them are recovering, but none of them are to anywhere near the historical population levels they were back 150 years ago. But yeah, you can hear it through the hulls of boats. The reason why you can hear the humpback whales is because they're really, really loud. But you wouldn't be able to hear as well. That's the coral reef sounds that I had, where I had that chortling and rattling and stuff like that. You wouldn't be able to hear as well. Oftentimes when we're in the settings, we're also subject to surf noise, which masks a lot of that to our hearing. So yeah.
Thank you. Kelly, would you like to unmute? Oh, I'm sorry. Ellen, did you have an additional question?
No. Thanks.
Kelly, would you like to unmute? I think you have an additional question.
Oh, I have a boatload of questions. I could ask you questions all night. I'm so intensely curious about the work that you are doing. So I wondered, like, are there some published research that would be good for us to refer to? Like, I make a lot of public comment at meetings, at public meetings, and I'm wondering if you have some ideas for that. And then what really sparked my interest in hearing you tonight is reading the book, This Immense World, and by Ed Young, and I wondered if you had read the chapter on the whales and if you had any comments on that.
Somebody just the other day brought my attention to that book, and so I just ordered it this morning. But here's a book that so I can get it. Let's see here. something like this. Anyways, this is a book called What a Fish Knows. And it's about the perceptual systems of fish. And it's a, it's a popular science book. It's not too complicated. But it talks about all sorts of things, not just perceptual systems and what they do with it and the complex cultural context that these animals. We're seeing that animals have sentience that is every bit as complicated as our own. There's cooperative interspecies hunting. There are animals that bond together for 20 years. There's animals that actually develop and they can identify humans, even when humans are in wetsuits, they can distinguish one from the other. And there's another book called Sounds of Nature, which I just recently read. I don't have it here. Oh, do I have it here? No, I don't. And then in my book, Here Where We Are, it's mostly about, it's a phenomenology of sound perception, but the last 2 chapters are how animals make and use sounds, various animals. And but I'm looking forward to this, What a Fish Knows, and also the Ed Young book. I'm really looking forward to that. But if you want to reach out, OCR.org is our organization, but if you can just probably info@ocr.org, I'm at the end of that one, and we can establish contact. We can talk a little bit more detail about this. I can turn you on to some literature, find out how deep you want to go, what level you want to make these, and what you're using the information for. So I'd be more than honored to talk with you about this if you're interested, Kelly.
Oh, you made my day in just a wonderful way. Thank you. I'm so excited.
Oh, great. Okay.
I think we have one last question, Jeannie Quartz. Jeannie, can you unmute?
Yeah, I just did. Yeah, thank you, Michael. That was really eye-opening regarding all the industrial noises. Biden is planning to approve the Willow Project in Alaska's North Slope and Western Arctic, meaning they'll be drilling for more oil. I have to wonder if these noises are ever taken into consideration before approval. My guess is politicians who push for ocean drilling have no idea how loud the noises are and how it impacts marine life.
Yeah, you're correct. That Willow Project is like, well, offshore oil is the noise, it's the noisiest industry. I mean, the shipping industry is persistent everywhere, but the offshore oil has so many different types of noises that they make, and they're so obnoxious, and they do take some consideration. But when you do an environmental impact statement or apply for incidental harassment authorization, once they get the authorization, they're the ones who's monitoring it. There's no provisions right now to have essentially a non-interested monitoring organization. The people who are the whale spotters on these boats when they're doing these things, I can only imagine you're on a boat with a bunch of guys, and most of these, biologists, there's one of them, and usually women, and they're not going to go down into the mess hall after they say stop this operation because we see whales. So I have no idea what their hit rate is in terms of essentially adhering to their harassment authorization conditions. I have no idea.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for the great questions. This was fascinating. I can see hydrophones now part of programming at Point Mulati.
That would be really great. Yeah, if you want to talk more about that, Pam, I mean, I'm not sure if, or we talk to get the parks. I think it would be really great to have that out there.
Yeah,
I'm
I
going
do
to
too.
I'm going to take a boat of kids out in May, and maybe we'll try to go up there and drop some hydrophones in the water, see what we can get on the front end of it, and then it'll inform that discussion.
Yeah, and we also had some great news today that the Marine Mammal Center would like to bring programming to Point Mulati Park when it opens. So that would be an amazing part of a hydrophone program as well. So thank you, everyone, and I'll turn it over now to Sally.
Okay, thanks to everyone for joining us. Next week, we have not quite committed, but we're thinking about having the session on a new campaign, which is called Point Malate Park now. And so if we decide to go ahead with it, we would be talking about some of the activities that are planned. So thanks, everybody, very, very much. We really appreciate your coming.
Thanks, Sally. Thanks, Pam. And yeah, thanks everybody for being a part. And Danny, thank you for running the tech.
Of course. Have a great night, everyone. Thanks,
Yeah, you
Michael.
too. Thank you.
Thank
Bye
you,
for now.
Michael.
Thank you, Michael.
Ciao.